In this tutorial, we're going to bring together the three parts we've looked at previously, using JavaScript to modify CSS, changing classes, or changing actual style information, using JavaScript to capture events like clicking of a mouse, and using JavaScript to process text field input to retrieve the values from that and then use that information to display content on our page. So with that, I'm going into my starting file. So this is a basic file that will be set up so that I will have two panels that I'm going to work with. In one panel here, I will now just add in an H2. And we'll just put in a header or a headline. And we'll add in a headline here. So now I have some starting information if I look at my page. So now I can see my page here has some core information. There's no styling or anything yet. I'll worry about that after I have built in the functionality of the page. So we don't want to get carried away with how it's going to look until we have a better understanding of what we're going to do with it. Now, my recommendation is we should always keep it simple first, and then we can grow what we're doing. So I'm going to add a paragraph. We'll ask the question, and now I will put an input, and it will be text. Now with this, I need to put an ID on it so I can retrieve it with JavaScript and access the value of this. So I'm going to be asking the name. I've used an input, so that is what I'm going to put on as my ID so that there's a relationship between them. We should always try and have those relationships so that when we are reading the code in JavaScript, it's easier to follow what is happening. And I want to put in a placeholder. And I can put it in like that. And now we can see that we may want to make the text field bigger. We can do that through CSS, or we can put it directly in it, or we can shorten down that placeholder. Now, sometimes you'll come across a form, and the only information on how to fill in the fields is hidden right here in the placeholder, but the moment I click to start typing, that placeholder goes away, so I don't know what's there. So that's problematic. So that's why we should always have some type of label or other text or other information telling us what needs to go inside that input field. Now, in my output, I'll put in a paragraph. And I'm going to just put some information here where in my output I'm getting ready for where that is going to go, because then we'll figure out how to update that. And I will put an ID on it. We'll call it results. Now, if we go back to input, we will see we have a similar sort of thing. We had a paragraph, we had an input, and then we had our paragraph that we put that input value in by changing the text content. So that's what we're going to end up doing in our project. So right now, I'm getting it set up. We also are going to need to put in a button so that we can do things with it. Now I'm going to recommend on it that we don't just rely on just using query selector to grab the tag, because ultimately we'll probably have more than a single button in this project when all is said and done. So now we'll put an ID on it. So we have a start. We can save our page, we can take a look and see what's there. So that's a start. Now what we need to do is let's start doing some stuff with our JavaScript. So what we can do is we're going to just start making references to all the objects, the elements in our page we wish to obtain or access control of, or to find their contents through JavaScript. Now this is just like what we did in all three previous examples where we use JavaScript to access those using query selector. So now I can just specify what I am trying to access. I need to put the hashtag in because I am accessing an ID. If I was accessing a tag, I could just put the tag, but that would return an array of tags if there's more than one. So, or of classes, tags, it returns the first one. So now that we've done this, I can Alt select and to insert my cursor in more than one place, and then single select there to, oh, there we go. Don't want an equals there, I have an equals here. Alright, so good start so far. We have the input panel, we have the output panel. We need to grab our text input form. We need to access the button and the results, so 3 more items for now. So again, we can just, if we use code completion, it might be as fast as, oh, missed my capital. So get our document query selector. And we'll grab results. So now we have the 2 panels, the input, text, the form button, the results. So we're off to a good start. Now when we click the button, this is if we reference events, we're going to add an event listener, and then we will call a function. So with that, we can now tell our form button to add event listener, and the event will be a click, and then it will be form button handler, and we don't want the event to bubble, so we put in false. Now we can make that, we're going to make a reference to the function that we are working with. So this is where we now are going to have that matching name. So we use the keyword function, form button handler, couple parentheses, curly braces. So now we have set it up. Now, a quick way to verify what is or what is happening. I mean, we can always log out to the console, so we could send something out. And with that, if I send out input name, and when I click on the button over here, we'll see it passed out the input. So that gives us the actual object. Because remember, we use query selector to access that object with this ID, which is that tag. But if we want the value that is typed there, so now type something in, we can see it's now passing in the value. So we're making progress here. But we don't want to log it out. What we want to do is we want to update the text content of our results. Now, something that we could do with that, if we just were to say results.text content, and now if we set it equal to something, becomes equal to that. And what we're also going to find out when we get more than one form is how we can use plus equals to keep adding to the text of that paragraph if we don't want to create multiple paragraphs. But we could also use JavaScript to create additional paragraphs of content here if we so desire. So now if I just set it equal to welcome, put a space, and now I put a plus sign, and then what I can do is put input name dot, not input panel, name dot value, and then add another plus, and in quotes I will put the period to be the end of the sentence. So let's save it, and we can see it now has updated the text. So we have it working. So if we want to add more to this, so what we're going to do is add an additional input. So I want this to be on its own line. So now I'll change that to color. Save it, see how it looks, so we can see our form is filling out. Now if we want to do something with this, well, one, we have to use some JavaScript to work with it. And I'm just going to put a couple returns in here so we have a little more room to work with. And it keeps our code kind of logically organized. And so now we have set it up. We have our input color. We can do something with that. Now if I want to add to this, so we're adding some text. I'm just going to turn on word wrap so it now will continue on to the same line. So we can see how I could add to it this way, but it's going to get really long. And if we have 4, 5, 8, 10, 12 different fields we're working with, eventually we seem to run into a problem if we try and make it too long. So instead, what we can do is continue adding to it using plus equals, which I alluded to previously. So I'll just delete the space there. Now let's go. So we'll do the text content, but this time use plus equals. And I can say my favorite color is, and now input color dot value, plus space as well. So we always have to think about, do we put the space at the beginning, do we leave one at the end to space things out correctly. So now If we hit submit, we can see how it's updating the text correctly for us. So we're in pretty good shape right now. We have 2 inputs, and at this point, if we wanted to have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 inputs, we would just keep using plus equals. Now, just to show how we have to be careful with this, if we forget the plus, and if I just say equals, now if we do this, I'll type in the same values. Now when I hit submit, we say, it doesn't say welcome and the person's name, it just says my favorite color is pink. And that's because anytime we use text content, we just use an assignment and single equal sign, it assigns whatever is after. It deletes what was there previously and replaces it. But if we want to add to it, we must use plus equals. And that allows us to keep adding to it as we go. With the input fields working, with the button working, with the events working, I'm going to go through and just put a little bit of style information in here. Let's try again. So what we're going to do is where we have display block and display none, and actually we'll just speed this up. Wrong file, here we go. So remember 2 classes that we can put on it. Nothing's changed yet in our document because we haven't applied those, but if I take on my output panel here, and if I add in a class, display none, refresh my page and look, we'll see we don't have anything there. And then when I update my items here, take our input panel, and this is where we can assign our class. So if we have additional classes, we can add or subtract this from our classes. So we can either use add or remove, or we can just set, if this is the only class we're going to use, then we can use class name as we looked at previously. If I want to add it or remove it, then we can use class list add and class list remove. So if you do have additional classes you've put on these, then we can do input panel, we will add display none, and output panel, class list remove, display none. And what we can do to verify things that are working, we could add in, but let's see how we're working here so far. Now if we click, we can see how it's now updated it. So we've added and removed from. But what we don't have is we don't have any way to go back and to try again. So if we were doing this as a MadLib, we may want to add in an additional button that would allow us to start over. So if we added a button element to our output panel, and then we wrote a function that allowed us to start over, that would switch which panel we can see, and it would have to also then clear the current contents of our input fields. So that would be now the next level of interaction that we will look at.